John.
Good morning. I'd like to call this October 18th, 2018 meeting of the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments to order. And Ms. Contreras, our clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Director Williams? Wolf? Adam? Levanino?
Here.
Richardson?
Here.
Mosby?
Present.
Bennett?
Here.
Clark?
Here.
Murillo?
Here.
Patino?
Here.
Sierra?
Here.
Julian?
Here.
And Chair Hartman.
Here. And I'd just like to note that because we're participating in two different locations, all of our votes today will be by roll call. Please stand for the pledge. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now is the time for public comment on matters not on today's agenda, yet within our scope of authority, our jurisdiction. Do we have any public comment forms?
Chair Hartman, we have Mr. Scott Wentz.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Scott Wentz representing Carson Basin. Nobody ever, including myself, ever thought this organization would be around for 20 years. The very first item that we ever passed as a board was we will not lie. We've been absolutely scrupulous in not presenting falsehoods. We have been unrelentingly opposed to holdouts called street extensions. For at least a decade now, we have come before this board, city council has said, international conferences cannot prove that holdouts make pedestrians safer. We now have 5 different organizations within the county of Santa Barbara stating that they have no statistical evidence proving that holdouts make pedestrians safer. The city of Carpinteria, the city of Toledo, the city of Santa Barbara, SBK, Director Kim. I understand, Director Kim sent us the information. And the county of Santa Barbara.
Excuse me, Chair Hartman?
Yes.
Apparently the public comment speaker's not on. They can't hear him.
Oh,
It's a yellow light.
okay.
So we need to repeat and start over.
All right. We want you on record, so you get a second go at this.
Okay. Scott Wentz representing Carcer Basic. Going back to my comments about bulb outs, there are no statistical evidence proving that bulb outs make pedestrians safer. I've gone to international conferences where these things have been presented. Just to make sure that I knew exactly what I was talking about, one of our board members, who's a physical engineer, he builds roads and freeways and bridges, went and did an exhaustive study and sent me a number of proposals for bulb outs. None of them, not one of them, had any statistical evidence. This organization has helped fund cities and the county and districts in the tens of millions of dollars for failure. But this is nothing new. This organization has funded failure in the city of Santa Barbara. The city of Santa Barbara bicycle stations failed. Mr. Dayton sitting right over here, under questioning from Mr. Hart, who's your assistant director, as a city councilman in the finance committee, said, what are we doing on the bike stations? Well, we're closing them down because they aren't being used. You have a massive problem. Your alternative transportation program is not working. It hasn't worked. The buses, if it wasn't for the city college students coming from Isla Vista into Santa Barbara, the MTD would be in massive failure. MTA in Los Angeles has seen massive failure. San Diego's bus system has not been proven to work out. When you have statements by Mr. Dayton saying you can't get people to walk 5 minutes to work, there's another failure, because alternative transportation includes walking as well as bicycles. People, you have to start looking at the reality of the world. Oh, well, it's about carbon. We have to do something about the carbon warming of the atmosphere. I challenge Chair Hartman, PhD, I'm a research scientist, do a regression formula on sunspot activity in the last 30 years and the global warming. The regression line you will find is absolutely amazing. People, you can't continue to throw good money after bad. And that's what this organization has been doing for years. Now, I will sit in back. You're more than welcome to ask me on an interrogative if you want, which is your privilege. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that our only public comment today?
That's the only public comment.
Okay, thank you. Then turning to our consent calendar, are there any items that anyone would like to pull? I gather 4H will require a separate vote as Supervisor Williams has to recuse himself. I would like to pull G. Anything else?
Yes, I would like to pull A, please.
All right. A. Director Julian? All right, would you read A into the record, Ms. Contreras? That's just our minutes? Director Julian, that's just our minutes?
Yes, I just need to abstain to that.
Okay.
Oh, okay, so we'll take a separate vote on the minutes. So may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Move the minutes, Madam Chair.
Second?
Second.
And roll call vote.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Wolf?
Aye.
Adam? Lavanino? Aye. Richardson?
Aye.
Mosby?
Aye.
Bennett?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Murillo?
Aye.
Tino?
Aye.
Sierra?
Aye.
And Julian?
All right, abstain.
And Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes 11-01.
Okay, turning to G, would you read that into the record?
For G, Northern Santa Barbara County Interim Coastal Trail Alignment and Improvement Study Consultant Contract. For G1, approve and authorize the chair to execute an agreement with the Santa Barbara Trails Council to prepare a Northern Santa Barbara County Interim Coastal Trail Alignment Improvement Study for a total amount not to exceed $80,000, with a period of performance from October 18th, 2018 through June 20th, 2021. For G2, approve and authorize the executive director to extend the period of performance for up to 1 additional year in accordance with section 4.B.
Thank you. And I pulled that item because yesterday I attended a very exciting quarterly meeting of Cycle California Coast, and they are working on marketing opportunities, looking at other cities and areas around the world, including Copenhagen and the Oregon coast, where cycling and alternative transportation is really driving local economies, particularly rural economies. So I was eager to get a little more background on this item.
Sure, Chair Hartman. Mike Becker of staff. This project was in our fiscal year 18-19 work program, and the purpose of it is to identify an interim alignment of the California Coastal Trail between Gaviota and San Luis Obispo County. Currently, the state of California does not consider an alignment between those two areas because they're holding out for a coastal route, which could be a long time coming through the Hollister Ranch, Coho Lama Ranch, Vandenberg Air Force Base. The purpose here is to identify an interim alignment until a true coastal alignment can be found, and with the intent of, once that interim alignment is identified, any improvements or any parallel projects that come along can focus their efforts on a single alignment. And we can also include it in any California Coastal Trail marketing materials and so forth, so that people know that they can get through Santa Barbara County, that it's not a dead end once you get to Gaviota. We went through a competitive bid process for this project. Ultimately, the Santa Barbara Trails Council was selected by SBCAG staff and the proposal reviewing committee. We're excited to get moving with this project. Happy to answer any questions.
I just had a comment. I think of the coastal trail as a braided coastal trail
Yes.
that may include rail, bike, and as well as hiking trails. So it's not an either-or proposition.
Right.
It's a both and. Director Wolf, did you have, or I see a light. Oh, all right. No other comments, and that doesn't require a vote. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Turning then to the item where Director Williams has to recuse himself, 4H, would you read that into the record? We'll have a separate vote, then go back and vote on the agenda as a whole.
4H, Federal Transportation Improvement Program Amendment. Adopt formal amendment number 17 and adopt a resolution amending the 2017 Federal Transportation Improvement Program to program funding for the US 101 High Occupancy Vehicle Project.
And may I have a motion to approve? Second? Second. Any further discussion? Any public comment? Would
No
you
public comment.
call the vote?
Director Wolf? Aye. Adams? Lavanino? Aye. Richardson? Aye. Mosby? Aye. Bennett? Aye. Clark?
Aye.
Murillo?
Aye.
Patino? Aye. Sierra?
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
And Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes 12-0.
Thank you. And may I have a motion to approve the remainder of the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second? How about, Director Williams moved it, and Director Bennett seconded it, if that's okay, and call the roll once again.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Wolf? Adam? Levanino? Richardson? Mosby? Bennett? Clark?
Aye.
Murillo?
Aye.
Patino? Sierra? And Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes 13-0.
Okay, and we're turning to item number 5 in our agenda, and Mr. Epperson, I think you're going to...
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Kent Epperson, and I'm the Director of the Traffic Solutions Division at SB-CAG. Today, it's my honor to present a plaque of recognition to one of our freeway service patrolmen, Miguel Obregon Padilla, for a great act of courage and compassion that ultimately helped in saving a woman's life. But before I get into that and presenting the award, I'd like to give you a quick background of the Freeway Service Patrol program. It was implemented in 2006, and its main goal is to improve traffic flow during the most congested parts of the day and the most congested segments of Highway 101. We do that by having patrolmen patrol up and down in different beats, we call them. We have 5 beats, 2 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, in those most congested segments of 101. And their goal is basically to remove any kind of obstacles that result in these major traffic jams that we've all experienced from time to time, whether that's an accident, whether that be just simply a car broken down on the side of the road, or maybe an object that's come off the back of a truck in the middle of the roadway. We contract with Smitty's Towing for that service, and this is a program that really is a collaboration between SB-CAG, Caltrans, and the CHP. It's funded primarily through a Freeway Service Patrol grant program at the state level, and we also use a surplus call box revenue that is collected through the $1 motorist registration fee in our county. Traffic Solutions adopted this program. We're managing the SAFE program and the call box program as of January, and I'm still getting up to speed on all the nuances of the program. But a couple months ago, MJ Wells, our administrative assistant, who does some of the data entry for these reports that we get on a regular basis. And by the way, I was looking back, the last 30 days or so, we had about more than 84 incidents that were responded to through the FSP program. But anyway, she was going through these reports, and she brought one to my attention. I was very thankful for that. As I looked into it more, I was deeply moved. And really felt like this was not just your normal incident of, say, filling a car with a gallon of gas to get them back running, or jumping a dead battery, towing a vehicle off the side of the road. This was really going way above and beyond the call of duty that ultimately really did help save a woman's life. So without getting into the actual details of this incident, basically Miguel Obregon Padilla, when he was on patrol in his beat, came across an accident. He was the first to respond, and things escalated, and he was there to aid the motorist and until the CHP arrived, and absolutely played an important role in saving her life. What I'd like to do is just read a quote that was offered up by Ed Morton, his supervisor over at Smitty's, about Michael's character. And I'd like to go ahead and invite Michael to come up to the podium, if you would. So Ed Morton provided this, and it says, Miguel is a valued member of our team and an outstanding individual. He was raised in Santa Barbara since he was 3 months old. He is married and has a beautiful daughter, almost 9, who he adores. He is also a huge 49ers fan. This was just a routine act of selflessness. He doesn't feel he did anything special when in fact he saved a person's life. Miguel doesn't see it that way. He doesn't feel like he did anything heroic at all. He was just there at the right time in a person's life. He always goes out of his way to help anyone. His actions undoubtedly saved a person's life, and he should be immensely proud of this. There are heroes who walk among us, never looking for glory or praise. They don't seek recognition for their thoughtful, caring ways. That is Miguel. Miguel is a hero. So with that, I'd like to ask Chairperson to read the plaque, and then we'd like to invite Miguel up to the front here, and if we can get a quick photo with all the board members at the dais, that would be great.
In recognition of a heroic act of courage, compassion, and professionalism under pressure to help save the life of a distressed motorist on Highway 101, Miguel Obregon Padilla, Freeway Service Patrolman and Smitty's tow truck operator. Thank you for your service and dedication to the Freeway Service Patrol of Santa Barbara County, presented by this Santa Barbara County Association of Government Board of Directors, October 18th, 2018. If you'd like to say a few words, I'll come down and present this and then bring you back up here for your picture.
Sure. And if you don't want to, also, that's okay too. I did say that he didn't have to say anything if he didn't want to, so there's no pressure at all. Yeah.
No, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for this. I mean, I didn't think much of it, just trying to help somebody out. And that's what we do out here, because, I was raised all my life in Santa Barbara, and, we know that 101 is tough as it can be already, and getting some help. People always look forward to that, every day. And I always hear people like, we never heard about this program before. And I'm like, but we're out here, to help anybody. So in any way we can, we try to do. We have quite a few people that I just want to say thank you to. Obviously to all of you for supporting us, and thank you. And especially my boss, Greg from Smitty's, Boyd, for putting up with me. And especially Ed, because he deals with me all the time. And yes, I'm a 49er fan. I'm proud. Thank you.
I'd just like to add, all of us at one time or another have been a distressed motorist in a very dangerous situation, and we appreciate your professionalism and all of your colleagues coming to our rescue. Thank you.
And while you're coming up, I just want to say, you may not think you did something special, but your daughter will, so please show her and tell her the story.
So some of us sitting, some of us standing?
I'm DOS.
There you go. Okay, and let's squeeze in. No one else is going to sit down here with us?
I'll sit down. Balance it out. Oh, here. Go ahead.
Come on, crowd a little. Otherwise, we'll all look like really small.
Yeah, all right. I walked on too.
Oh, very good. Great, thank you.
Perfect. Pleasure to meet you, Gal. Congratulations. Glad to meet you. Oh, congratulations. How do I get back?
I think I was in the chair, yeah. Was that a special?
Okay, turning to item number 6. Would you read that into the record, Ms. Contreras?
Item 6, planning, mobility, and safety for all modes. Receive a presentation from SBCAG staff on complete streets and from the City of Santa Barbara staff on the city's Vision Zero policy.
Mr. Becker.
Thank you, Chair Hartman and Board Directors. Mike Becker, staff again. I'm here. This is a result of Chair Hartman's request last month to bring back something on complete streets and the Vision Zero. And we were able to get Rob Dayton from the City of Santa Barbara and Derek Bailey to present the Vision Zero. I'll present the complete streets. And if I've learned anything since I've known Rob is you always want to go first. Fortunately today I do get to go first. So I have a very brief presentation. I'll leave most of the time for Rob, but I just wanted to give an overview of what a complete streets policy is. So Caltrans has, or before we get into the policy, what is a complete street? A complete street is essentially just a road that's designed for the safe mobility of all users. It's Caltrans definition on there. I highlighted appropriate, and that's appropriate to the function and context of the facility. On the left, you see Avenue of Flags in Buellton. I would consider that a complete street. It accommodates all users. It accommodates the automobiles, the bicyclists, the pedestrians, the transit users. And then on the right, I'm not entirely sure, I believe that might be Happy Canyon way out in the San Ynez Valley. And I would argue that that's also a complete street. There's so little traffic of any type that it safely accommodates all users. For the policy, Caltrans has a policy, it's written on there, but essentially what a policy does is it formalizes looking at opportunities to improve roads for all users. It's essentially whenever you're going to dig up a road or repave a road, you look at the needs of the users, the existing users and the potential users to see if they're being met and to see if anything can be worked into that project. It's a lot easier to make that improvement while you're digging it up rather than to come back later to make it. New Jersey DOT, New Jersey has to be good for something, and this is what it is. So they have a complete streets policy at the state level, and it is what I would consider the best one, and if you read about it, many others would agree with me that it's probably the best complete streets policy. I would encourage anybody who's looking to implement a complete streets policy to look at New Jersey. It's project by project. It includes a checklist. So whenever you're going to repave a road or dig up a road, the project engineer is going to go through this checklist. It's saying, who are the users? Are there pedestrian users? Is there a transit route along here? Is there bicycle traffic? How's it compare to what plans are already in place? Is there anything that we can do to improve it? It gives details. So for instance, if the automobile traffic is above a certain threshold, then it would call for sidewalks or bike lanes. It does allow for exemptions. For instance, you're not going to put sidewalks on a freeway, or you're somewhere like that Happy Canyon where there really isn't a need for sidewalks or bike lanes. It recognizes that. But the interesting thing about New Jersey is if an exemption to the policy is called for, it has to be approved by the commissioner of the DOT. So it puts some teeth into the policy. So I have a couple pictures here. This is Cathedral Oaks near Turnpike when the bridge was being replaced near Tucker's Grove. So you have the bike lanes closed, the sidewalk closed, but you're considering complete streets in this project because if you see in the foreground, there is a detour. The needs of the pedestrians and bicyclists were considered. Here you have a place that's popular among bicyclists with no bicycle parking. Until this came along, you replaced one automobile parking spot with 14 bicycle parking spots. So it's recognizing the needs of the user of that street, a complete streets element, I'd call it. Here, some people call this a path. Complete streets we consider a need for a sidewalk. And it just shows that this is not a complete street. It's missing a key element. This is right outside of our office on Cali Real. I would note that This was recently resurfaced, and the county did make some changes, so that was good. It was at the intersection with Turnpike. They added a second left turn lane, so they do recognize that it's an opportunity to make improvements whenever you're repaving the road. So how do you do it? You understand who the users of the facility are and what their needs are. I would note that, too, that the county has already put a sidewalk here where this woman's walking along the road. But you have to assess the needs. Don't assume that what you did in the past is still relevant, and plan accordingly. So what can you do? You can add sidewalks. Add shoulders for bicyclists, or in some instances, a shoulder for a pedestrian is perfectly adequate. You can add signs while you're during a project, add crosswalks, add transit amenities, change the striping pattern. I think the worst thing you could do is dust off into a 20-year-old striping pattern or plan and assume that it's still relevant. It's essentially, you're just capitalizing on the opportunity of resurfacing the road or digging the road up. So in summary, I would say that it's largely already practiced without a policy, that you do look for opportunities, and really what the policy does is it formalizes that process. And it says instead of just looking if we're accommodating traffic, that we also look, can we make it better for bikes or better for pedestrians or better accommodate transit users? It is applicable to all roads, not just urban areas. Perhaps there's fewer complete streets amenities are appropriate in rural areas, but it doesn't mean that the roads aren't being used by bicyclists and pedestrians and joggers and so forth. Really, the policy is about capitalizing on an opportunity. For instance, and then if we can't afford to fix something, at least we know what's broken and we can come back later or try and seek funding to fix it. In California, 7 counties have policies, 8 regions, 95 cities, including the city of Santa Barbara, which is only in our region, and also the state has a policy. And
is
that's
Santa Barbara County one of the 7?
No, the only policy in our region is the city of Santa Barbara. Yes. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Rob Dayton to talk about the city's Vision Zero.
Let me just ask, are there any questions that the directors have for Mr. Becker? Director Wolf.
Thank you. I don't have a question, more of a comment, and I see Mr. Snedden in the audience. So the county doesn't have a policy, but I think, at least from what I've seen, that there is this the sense that we want to move forward with complete streets. Now, you pointed out Calle Real, and there was that portion that wasn't fixed, but what wasn't mentioned is that the larger portion of Calle Real now does have a sidewalk, and it's been repaved, and there are better bike lanes. So maybe we do need to have a policy that reflects what we're doing. But I think that the county, just sticking up for the county, because I think we try to, with the money that we do have, to look at the concept of complete streets. So the part that you showed that we didn't complete, but if you look the other direction, we had done, and through Public Works, had done a really significant job. The other piece, and you pointed out the detour sign, which is also in my district. That's right. When they were doing the bridge work, and they did do that was a tough project because it took so long, but they did work really hard on the detour sign. But subsequent to that, the final, and I almost wish that we had the next picture would have shown the completed project, because that also reflected a complete streets strategy. So I'm just directing this to our county that since there are some counties who have a policy, that it might be a good thing for us to get on that list, and so that we can reflect some of the work that we're doing, and also where areas that we can improve. So I just want to thank you for bringing this to our attention, and We can always do better, but I do think from the county's perspective, we're hanging in there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I had a question about the assessment that's done. I mean, I think what you've made clear is it's not every use, every place, but when there are opportunities, it's good to maybe, instead of just assume what's happened in the past and go forward, to step back and look at who the users are. And is there a formal assessment, or is this something that's done informally?
I think that's probably different by jurisdiction, but I'd point back to New Jersey, where they do have a formal process where the engineer is going to go through and check a lot of boxes that look, is there that path alongside the road that's kind of pointing to the need for a sidewalk? Do you see a lot of bicycles, but there's no shoulders? So it could be more quantitative, and if you go to New Jersey, it's more qualitative. And I think that's what's good about New Jersey's policy is it's qualitative and it has teeth, because if you're going to try and get a project exempted, you have to go the whole way to the top to get it done.
Director Sierra and I share an area on Haneda Park Road that's used by a lot of cyclists and a lot of walkers, and there's not a really safe place. And so I'm just asking, how would we elevate this or get it looked at, or do we wait till it gets repaved? It's part city, part county, and so it's a case study, for example.
Right, that's a good question, because it's multi-jurisdictional. I think for starters, we could maybe sit down with SB-CAG and the county and the city of Buellton to see if anything could be done, or if it could be incorporated into a plan, but also I think talking with the county and the city to see when an improvement project is coming along that we could potentially make changes.
Great, thank you. Because at dusk, when a lot of people are out, it's really hard to see in there in dark clothes. And Director Sierra.
Yes, a lot of people do enjoy running along there. And when they try to do their run in the morning before they go to work, there's a lot of traffic. I mean, fortunately, we've got a lot of scrub brush on the sides, so there's a safe place, a soft place to jump, a little scratchy, but a soft place. So,
but people are there with baby carriages, and
it's a beautiful little road, and it's really nice to be able for pedestrians to enjoy too, and it is hard.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate that. And I also wanted to put in a plug for our county roads. As a supervisor, the majority of my calls come about road issues, and our public works and roads people are highly, highly responsive and really great dealing with sometimes cantankerous constituents. So on to the next Vision Zero.
Good morning, Chair Hartman and directors. My name is Rob Dayton. I was born and raised in New Jersey. So, actually, not really. It's a pleasure to be here from the city of Santa Barbara. Thank you, Michael, for asking us to be here, and Director Kern. It really is an honor to be here and tell you a little bit about Vision Zero and what the city's doing and has done, and what the council's done with Mayor Murillo's leadership. Vision Zero was addressed by the city of Santa Barbara first with a resolution to do a policy and have a policy for the city, and then next to have the staff develop a strategy by how would we actually implement Vision Zero. What is Vision Zero? Where did it come from? Well, it actually started in Sweden, of all places, and it's the concept that traffic-related deaths and severe injuries are not acceptable. They just should not be acceptable. And that there should be a shift in transportation goals and the way we think about transportation on our streets. And they have had significant results in curbing the number of deaths in Sweden with their policy. The council, when they first looked at, our city council, when they first looked at the resolution, the first thing they said is we want to eliminate all severe and fatal transportation-related collisions by 2030, and then prioritize transportation safety. In other words, transportation safety will be on the forefront of any decision or policy decision or project decision that we make. It's going to be safety first, which introduces some interesting aspects about how we handle our constituents, which I'll get into. How could you imagine that we would eliminate deaths and severe injuries by 2030? That, you know, a lot of people are kind of disrupted by that. What is a severe injury? That's one where you there's in the collision, the result is that you'll go to the hospital. So you're hospitalized. That would be a severe injury. In terms of how Santa Barbarans get to work, and you think about who are the people who are actually getting hurt on our roadways, this is kind of an interesting way of looking at this is how people get to work. This percentage is very similar to what you would see in the entire county. And 13% of our road users right now are made up of bicyclists and pedestrians. And when you look at all collisions, the total collisions on the left, for the last 10 years, you see kind of the same pattern and the same percentages. But then when you look at those that actually end up in the hospital or die, you see a much different story. As a matter of fact, although pedestrians and cyclists are only 13% of the mode share, they represent, in the last 10 years in Santa Barbara, 62% of the people who have died or been hospitalized because of a collision on the road. So what that tells us is that we have some, and we call them vulnerable users. We have some vulnerable users on the road. And this kind of harkens back to what you just heard from Michael Becker about having a complete streets policy. That's why it's important to position our pedestrians and our cyclists very well on the roadway to give them the best opportunity to be seen and to be safe. Speed has a very direct contribution to the result of an injury in a collision. 90% of the pedestrians that are hit at 20 miles an hour or less, they survive. But at 40 miles an hour, 90% will have a fatality because they're being hit by a car. So speed plays a huge factor in this discussion. So when the staff of the city of Santa Barbara looked at how are we going to do this? Well, of course, we looked at the internet and what is New Jersey doing? Now, what are all these other places doing? What are their policies and what are their successful things? So this is the core of our strategy. We call it a strategy rather than a plan because we want it to be fluid. We want to reference it in council meetings. The core principles are really helpful for doing that, and I'll show you those. Safety first mentality. How are we going to think differently? The best thing to hearken for you is think recycle. How do we get to recycle? You know, it started with a crying Indian on a commercial, and it ended up being like now you're guilted out if you got you're looking for the blue can. Where's the blue can? Because you have to recycle. We went through a mental transition. How can we get there in transportation and think that way? And then priority corridors. Where on our streets are we going to focus our attention to be successful at eliminating fatalities and severe injuries? So here's our principles. Very just easy to understand in terms of bringing in a council item when you're talking about a specific project. Life is most important. This is kind of interesting because when we hear from our PD, we hear from our police department and they say there were this many robberies and this many people died because of an injury. There's actually no difference between dying as a result of a crime and dying in a car or on a street. It's still a death. So thinking about, hey, life is important, just like we think about crime, we're going to think about transportation. Every person matters. It's an equality issue. People make mistakes. This is a core tenet of Vision Zero is that people are going to make mistakes. They just are. And so how can we account for their mistakes? Focus on dangerous locations and behaviors. There's locations that we know through statistics, there's going to be another collision. How do we get ahead of the curve and address that? Drivers have a critical responsibility driving that 5-ton vehicle. If they hit something at 40, it's going to be a bad thing, so they have a critical responsibility. And then pedestrians and cyclists, they need to realize they're the most vulnerable users. How can they be seen better? And then the government shares responsibility, and that's taking the Vision Zero approach. The safety first mentality is best understood when comparing the airline industry with the auto industry. The airline industry has always had Vision Zero, always, for a number of different reasons, because if a plane goes down, that's newsworthy. We hear about it. And so when a collision occurs, and even you heard about when we were celebrating Miguel just recently, when there was a collision, we talked about the delay on the freeway. We have those responders for delay on the freeway. When we hear about a collision, it's like, oh, how long am I going to be delayed? We don't even think now mentally about what happened to that family and how their life changes now. So thinking differently, but in the airline industry, it's top of mind, top of news, it's about the death. And so how many times have we been on the tarmac and the pilot comes on and says, hey, we're turning the plane around. And then the plane still magically left within an hour and a half or 2 hours, but we turn the plane around because we don't take any chances in the airline industry. And 2017 was the first year in the airline industry there were 0 fatalities in that industry. So they have the mentality, and we can get there too, but it's a radical thinking about how we're going to change and look at this. Someone challenged us on this and said, well, what about the pilot? You know, pilots are held to high standards. It's a totally different thing than a driver. Well, if a pilot is drinking, they're done. Their career is completely done. And in Germany, if you get pulled over for intoxication, your driver's license is done. You're never driving again. But in the United States, that's just not the case. So we have a long way to go in our thinking. These are some of the things that we're dealing with. Speeding, substance abuse is a really, really big one. Distracted driving, now that we have the phones, how could we change the mentality so when you actually pick up the phone, you're going, oh no, I can't do this. Same as with the aluminum can. We got to think, I can't touch that phone when I'm behind the wheel. Unsafe road infrastructure, non-use of safety devices, like seatbelts, inadequate enforcement, and that's really kind of a big, tall order for our community in Santa Barbara, because it's hard to get officers even to work in the city of Santa Barbara with cost of living. So how do you get them to pull everyone over and reinforce that law? This is the way we're being strategic in addressing collisions. Engineering approach, evaluation, education, and enforcement. All 4 of these have to work together. And we don't have Mike Brown, Officer Mike Brown, who's a part of our team. We have Derek Bailey, who's an amazing traffic engineer. Please don't offer him a job. This is the team. It's enforcement, engineering, and we do evaluation and education, which is transportation planning's responsibility. These working together. So what we've done is we've said, hey, here's over the last 10 years, here's where all the collisions, and keep in mind that I keep saying collision, because we tend to call them accidents, and that's part of the mental shift. It's a collision. There is no such thing as an accident. Whatever happened in that situation, somebody wasn't paying attention, somebody was at fault. There's very few arguments for an actual accident. Something is happening to cause it. So we evaluate the data, we look at patterns. Here's what we found. This is a heat map for our collisions. This shows that we actually have corridors, and the really red hot one down by the freeway is State Street, where we have a kind of a focus of collisions right in there. And so it shows where do we need to target. And then we've taken all our corridors and said, hey, Upper State Street is that's a place where we really need to focus our attention. And then Cliff Drive is next, Lower State Street. These are areas of our city where we can do targeted strategic enforcement. So we have the cops out there giving tickets specific to the collision record that we're seeing. We know that there's patterns within these corridors where the collisions are going to repeat, and there's a possibility for death and severe injury again. So then Derek is working on the engineering solution. The cops are working on the tickets that are targeted toward those behaviors that will result in collisions again. And then we educate the public and say, hey, look out on Upper State Street. This is what's happening on Upper State Street, and we get the advertisement out there. And then we want to see a change. In our strategy, we also have action items for each corridor. Just generally what we're planning to do with each corridor. But I think it's really instructive for you to see Derek Bailey in an engineering specific situation where we had a record of collisions and severe injuries, and we went to 0. So Derek, come on up and explain that to us.
Good morning. My name is Derek Bailey. I'm with the city's traffic engineering group. Even though Vision Zero itself is new to the city, collision mitigation is something we've been doing for many years. And a few years ago, this was a location in the city that popped up on our radar. There was a pattern of collisions happening at this intersection. This is State Street at Kai Paula, Colorado. So on the left of the screen is the San Roque neighborhood, and on the right of the screen is the Mackenzie Park. So it's a busy crosswalk. And the pattern of collisions that was happening at this, oh, wrong button, I'm sorry. There. Okay, the pattern of collisions that have been happening have been pedestrian and bike-involved collisions, mostly pedestrian-involved collisions at this location. Since 2001, there have been 7 severe injuries at this location. So this location represented the #2 location in the city of Santa Barbara for pedestrian-involved collisions. As Michael Becker was talking about complete streets and thinking about the context of all road users at this particular location, this is a really important street in Santa Barbara for mobility for all users. There's nearly 30,000 vehicles a day go down this corridor. Like I mentioned, it's a busy crossing place because the neighborhood on one side of the street and the park on the other side of the street. And so we had to develop a solution that supported all uses. And so this is what was built in 2016. Just going to run through some of the features that were installed here. Rectangular rapid flashing beacons. The city has 18 rectangular rapid flashing beacon sites, and if you're not familiar with the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, they're yellow lights. They kind of had a stutter pattern to them, and they're very noticeable to approaching drivers, and they're a lot more noticeable, and they draw a lot more attention than the traditional just orange pulsing lights that have been used historically. They've been very effective in the city of Santa Barbara. We've had great success with them. We put a center median island in the middle of the street. And that way, the pedestrians, if they are crossing the street, they have a refuge in the center of the street. So if there is traffic coming in the opposite direction, they can go halfway at a time. It also provided us with a really good location to mount that second set of flashers. What we've noticed is the drivers are a lot more responsive to the flashers when they're closer to the center of the driver's cone of vision, as opposed to being spread out way on either side of a really wide street. They don't work quite as well. The white triangles on the road, shark's teeth, we call them, it's an advanced yield line, so it encourages drivers to, when there is a pedestrian in the crosswalk, stop in advance of the crosswalk. If a driver pulls right up to the crosswalk and there's a pedestrian crossing the street, it's hard to see around that driver, and if there's a driver coming up the second lane, that's what we call a multiple threat condition, and that can result in a really bad collision. And as well, ADA compliant ramps, and the ramps that were installed at this intersection are what we call directional ramps, so they point the pedestrian in the direction that we want them to go. And again, the yield lines. Like I mentioned, this was completed in June 2016, and since then we haven't had any pedestrian-involved collisions. So great success. We were able to maintain traffic lanes, maintain mobility for all users, and our collision problem has disappeared. Thank you.
Director Wolf?
So with that,
just real quick, yeah. I find this fascinating because I go past there a lot, and there's also Trader Joe's on De La Vino, so I can understand why. I mean, it is heavily traveled. And I saw those little triangles that you mentioned, and I'm really glad that you explained what they're for. What did you call them again?
Shark's teeth.
Shark's teeth. The technical term is a yield line, but we call them shark's teeth.
I don't know, am I alone in not knowing what those are? It sounds like everyone knows what they are. I had no idea what those were. So you're basically supposed to stop behind those when there's the blinking lights.
Director Wolf, yes. It is a visual cue for drivers just to give a little bit more space when they yield to pedestrians between where they're stopping and the crosswalk.
And is there any signage before you get to those shark anything? Is there like a pedestrian crossing sign or anything like that?
There's not. Typically at our, and we only use the shark's teeth on multi-lane approaches.
Oh.
And typically there would be a sign off to the side of the road saying drivers yield to pedestrians here, and there's a little arrow that points down. We don't have a good mounting location for the sign in this particular approach, but typically that's what you would see.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Some of these...
Director Mosby had a question too.
Well, we're answering questions, so perfect time. Okay.
Well, you're there.
I just want to say, you know, what you have here is very important for my community of Lompoc. 4 fatalities approximately in the last 30 days in the surrounding roads. So a lot of what you have here, I'm going to try to link up your segment as a PSA, I hope you guys don't mind, and get it out there, because it's very important. I mean, you guys are obviously ahead of where we are, but I really appreciate this great timing for what we've been having in our community. So not really a question, except, I mean, if you guys don't want to be on our PSA, I guess, but, you know.
Well, and
Thank
also
you.
we have, so we have the strategy that we'll share with you. We'll give you a link to our strategy, and if you'd like a Word version of that you can edit, please reach out to me and we'll get that to you. We're happy to share whatever we have so you can do less work.
Okay, consider this a reach out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Director Sierra, don't go yet. And just Director Clark after that.
Just a quick question. Our biggest traffic problem is on Highway 246 that goes right through the middle of Buellton. Even though we have a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit, traffic gets 2 lanes in each direction with the huge turning medium. They just zip through. Would something like this work on a highway in a residential area, do you think?
Director Sierra, without knowing the exact location, yes, it can. The rectangular rapid flashing beacons tend to work well 35 miles an hour and below.
And we have the flashing lights with the sidewalk, but not the irregular. It's not very bright. People complain that they can't even see it when people are trying to cross.
At higher speed approaches, there's another device called a pedestrian hybrid beacon. The city of Goleta actually has the first in our county, and they can work really well too, and they're more effective at higher speed approaches. And I'll just throw it out there too, you know, we as a city, we collaborate really well with the rest of the South Coast agencies that we work with, but if there's any other agencies that you'd like to bounce ideas off of or anything, we offer that.
Terrific, thank you very much.
Director Clark?
Thank you. I support this approach, but I like to, you know, emphasize what was touched on in terms of behavior. I'm an industrial safety engineer, spent a lot of years working for the federal government developing epidemiological models of accident occurrence. And so I concur with your explanation of accidents. You know, what we found a lot is that, especially in workplace safety, which is ruled, you might say, by OSHA, which has a lot of engineering standards. You put all that stuff in place and accidents still happen. And it's not to say that the engineering stuff is bad, it's just that behavior is an overwhelming factor. And in the city of Carpinteria, recently we've had a rash of car-on-kid accidents, the most recent one within the last week, and none of them were really serious, but these are happening at rush hour while kids are going to school, and it's a result of the Lyndon Casitas construction project. And what's happening is, if you're a commuter coming from the south and you want to get to Santa Barbara or points north, and the traffic gets jammed up in Carpinteria where the bottleneck currently exists, so your app on your phone tells you to go on Carpinteria Avenue, and well, that's where the school is, and people are now late for work, and they're not in a slow down mode. And then we had another situation where the main on-ramp for Carpinterians to get to Santa Barbara is occasionally closed for construction. So motorists from Carpinteria are directed to get on the freeway through a residential street, and they're going 50 miles an hour on a 25-mile-an-hour street where there's kids living and going to school. We recently had the benefit of having a CHP officer on this street who I think wrote 60 tickets in 24 hours. But that was just a temporary thing, and but we're still having problems, and you know, I guess if the city approaches SBCAG in the future to get some help in getting more enforcement because of this project on our city streets, I hope we would support that. But also, it's just to back up, and it's really, there is a behavior problem. We had one of the ones on Carpentry Avenue, is people just following too closely, going too fast, and you get these chain collisions, and the front car runs into a kid. And I mean, that's, you know, we got the speed limit, we got all the streets are good, we got the speed limit, but there's no enforcement. And you know, it's because we have one police officer for the whole city. Anyway, thank you.
Any response to that?
I think it's important to acknowledge that we can't re-engineer every street in the city or whichever jurisdiction we're working at. So how do we deal with collisions that might be happening on lower volume streets or streets that don't necessarily have a repeat pattern? You know, it's more of a systematic problem, and it really does boil down to behavior. So, you know, we can focus our engineering dollars on hotspots and corridors where there's this repeat pattern, and that repeat pattern tells us it's likely to happen again. But the enforcement and education are just critical to really changing that behavior system-wide.
And I would just add to that, you know, we're in the transportation field, we were taught that there's a certain number of death and severe injury per million miles traveled. We were taught this. So this is translating the public's verbiage, and everything's out there mentally. We all think this is okay. So it's going to take some transformation over time to say, wait a minute, if we make this decision, then that's going to actually get some people hurt, and we are safety first. We don't want anyone hurt. So that means we're making a different decision, and that may mean compromising other things that we haven't, you know, we don't have the actual situation here, but that's what that may mean. And as we think in the workplace, it's blowing our minds how many things have changed in how we think about approaching the council on a project decision and what our recommendations going to be made, because we go, wait a minute, it's no longer like the public is saying we want this, and then we're looking at the collision record, you're like, okay, but if we do that, then we're going to get a repeat. And so then we're carefully bringing these things to the council saying, hey, this is a real deal, we got to make this decision because this is Vision Zero, safety first.
Director Williams.
Yeah, I think this is a revolutionary concept because, you know, if as many people were dying from a serial killer as die in auto accidents, there would be vigilante squads, there would be rioting in the streets, people would be demanding action. If as many people died in traffic accidents, or as many people died from shark attacks as traffic accidents, there would be the same level of hysteria. But this many people die from traffic accidents, and we just sort of plod along like nothing's happened. And I think it should shake us out of our complacency that there are jurisdictions that are making progress. Now, technology is making progress, you know. I'll make a little plug, as usual, for electric cars, because man, you know, all the freeway on-ramps in Carpentry are really dangerous, you know. I mean, Al knows it. And now I can actually get on the freeway at enough speed with an electric car because they accelerate really fast. Now, conversely, when you're doing long trips, they kind of incentivize you to go the speed limit because you get a lot more range. So, you know, I've noticed after now 8 years of driving an electric car, I drive a lot slower on average than I did 8 years ago. Maybe it's also I'm getting old, but it's a real radical shift when you're aware, because of the computer model of how your driving habits is affecting how far you can go. And then of course safety devices. I think that new cars, especially electric cars, a lot of great safety devices that, early warning, collision warning, keep you in the lane type of stuff, that I think have been really useful.
Director Wolf or Director Adam?
No, I couldn't stand it anymore. Steven Pinker's speaking tonight at Arts and Leisure, and I think you really need to go see that, because maybe everybody needs to go see it. Steven Pinker's whole deal now is everything's better and safer than it's ever been. And it's true. You know, look at how many, you were saying that that one intersection had 30,000 trips a day. Well, that's a lot of trips. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, how safe do you think you can make it? I mean, Mr. Clark was talking about how, it's human behavior that causes these things. And, we have limitations on our attention and distractions. My kid's sick, or my wife's, doesn't love me anymore, or, whatever, I mean, we have these things that happen in our lives that are massive distractions, and we're never going to cure that. On a human level, you are still dealing with humans, and the intersection's the intersection, and you can do what you want, but, back to Supervisor Williams' point, zero is a really small number. And to try to get there in a real way with something like auto accidents, I think, I'm just trying to put this discussion in context. You're never going to get to zero, absolute zero. And, because you're dealing with humans, it's nice to say that, and it's a laudable goal to have, and you should be trying to improve things all the time, and we are. People improve all aspects of our lives all the time, and continuous improvement is great, and everybody should pursue that in a diligent manner. But let's not forget how great everything is.
So, Chair Hartman, and thank you for that. That was great, Director Adam. I think that this is actually what he's saying is where a lot of us, certainly I was, and believing that. And some of the statistics that are coming out are very encouraging. The city of New York passed their Vision Zero approach, which is exactly the way I've explained for the city of Santa Barbara. They've had since 2014, a 40% reduction in pedestrian deaths in the city. So it's a mentality, and again, the airline industry. If the same amount of people died in the airline industry in the United States that died in the auto industry, it would be 2 jumbo jets crashing every week. So if 2 jumbo jets were crashing every week, I don't think we'd see people flying. So it's just an awareness. 40,000 Americans, and it's going up. A year are getting killed in auto-related collisions.
Yeah, I see Director Lavanino and Director Murillo, but I just wanted to interject here. I think engineers and perhaps political people too think about optimizing different values, and I think this is a whole different way of looking at it. We want to maximize, we want to give absolute priority to safety, and that is a big mind switch. It's not just, oh, we're going to improve gradually over time. We're going to really focus on this above all other values. Director Murillo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank city staff. We're so proud of our transportation planning staff, our traffic engineering staff. Thank you. And we were talking about the personal responsibility part of people leave 5 minutes before, if you think it's going to take 10 minutes, leave 15 minutes early. And if you get there early, you find the parking spot, you can check your email. There's a lot of benefits, right? And I thought of a slogan, and that's Alive with 5. And I might push that on you, I might not, but I just wanted the public to hear that. And so even a bicyclist, if they left 5 minutes early, maybe they won't pull a crazy thing and try to get across traffic real fast. So we all need to slow down. I think that's what I heard Director Williams saying. Very proud of you today. Thank you for the presentation.
Director Lavanino?
Madam Chair, I'd just like to make a motion to move this receive and file.
Okay, well, let me just ask Director Aristone Julian, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I'm good. I think we'd like to adopt that there in Guadalupe. Our issue is with the train, but I appreciate the presentation because it's something that we all need to be aware of and try to implement within our communities. Thank you.
And we do have some public comment on this.
Yes, we have 3 public speakers. First, Mr. Frank Peters, followed by Daniel Fishbein, and then Mr. Ed France.
Director Hartman, members of the board. My name is Frank Peters. I'm with Santa Barbara Bike Coalition. I wanted to appear today to thank Rob Dayton and staff for preparing this report and appreciate Mayor Murillo and the City Council for their unanimous adoption of this Vision Zero. You know, I've seen...
Excuse me, I think your mic, the yellow light's on up here, so I'm not, maybe try, just do a little test.
Testing?
That's
Frank
better.
Peters is my name. Thank you. I wanted to, in other times that I've spoken in favor of this item, I've wanted to identify, put a face with one of the 7 principles. I remember that slide that talked about people make mistakes. I wanted to kind of, confession is good for the soul. You know, from time to time, we have to drive somewhere across the county. The Bike Coalition is a county-wide organization. I'll often volunteer. I'll drive with my colleague Ed France. But when we actually show up and there's the car sitting there, he'll increasingly say, mind if I drive? Because I've put him through a few scary moments. I did run a stop sign one time by accident, and I missed a turnoff one time. So anyway, I understand that I'm better off when I'm a pedestrian or a bicyclist. That's where I feel most comfortable. But at the same time, like we saw in the slides, I can relate to the fact that pedestrians and bicyclists are paying quite a heavy toll. We are indeed vulnerable users. So I appreciate your interest in Vision Zero, and thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Fishbein, retired medical epidemiologist from CDC, very interested in local public health. And I wanted to let you all know that from my point of view, they've done a magnificent job, but they are extremely under-resourced. And let me talk about what I know, public health. In virtually every Vision Zero document on the web, and this one's from the Vision Zero Network, public health officials are an extremely important part of the Vision Zero process. Santa Barbara City, of course, does not have any public health officials. And I'd like to urge you to either ask the county to participate in this process, or at least, you can use my services free of charge, to bring public health. So what's the public health perspective? 2 quick points. Number 1, I'm sorry to contradict my colleague, Mr. Dayton, but the severe injuries, all we know about what happens to them is what the law enforcement officer checks on their form. We don't know if they go to the hospital. Cottage Health does, the county does, but we don't know. And 1 out of every 3 severe injuries based on other Vision Zero cities, there is no police report. Because, like my wife, severe injury, I took her to the hospital. Police never involved. So public health is extremely important. Second public health point, and I will give this to my, if he's allowed to accept it here, colleague here, that is a Vision Zero New York City helmet. They have an extremely active helmet program as part of the Vision Zero network. I know nothing about engineering, but I do know that helmets save lives unequivocally. Bicycle helmets are not even mentioned, not one word, in the Santa Barbara Vision Zero strategy.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, directors, my name is Ed France. I work for the Santa Barbara County Bike Coalition, and I really want to appreciate SBCAG for hearing this item. Clearly, this is one of the essential elements that needs to be taken into consideration into how we manage our roadways. And unfortunately, it hasn't been taken into consideration enough, and we do have to catch up. And I think Vision Zero, as Director Adam kind of points out, zero is pretty small, right? But you know, there are other ways to frame this. Was riding out for Bike and Walk to School Day with kids out to Ivy Elementary. And for the first time, they were able to ride on an off-road path through that North Campus open space instead of Stork Road, which is a 4-lane roadway. Those kids, or me, or any of us, are 6 times more likely to be killed than if they were riding in Germany or Denmark. We need to catch up in this portion of how we manage our roadways. And I think that the staff have done an excellent job of presenting a methodology that they can bring to bear so that we can catch up in the safety gap. We could call it Vision Zero, or we could call it like, come on guys, we need to do a better job here because we're putting our population at risk daily. And these examples from Lompoc or Carpinteria are always heartbreaking. And somehow we don't count them. Like, who's keeping the running tally? So anyway, that's my, my venting. But in terms of methodology, it can't stop just with transportation, staff, and engineering. I think the integration of CHP, sheriffs, our municipal police departments are really essential. So when we are, as Mr. Dayton presented, when we're presenting assaults and robberies, we're also presenting traffic injuries and deaths. And that's one of those stats that we get updates on, because what gets measured matters. And to Dr. Dan Fishbein's point, which I think, by the way, is a great articulation of how important this work is, important work that matters gets critiqued. And this is important work that matters. And the public health intervention, exactly as the conversation of behavior, right? We can't engineer our way out of this thing. And we need to find other public health interventions for this risk to the public health. And I think that integration of county public health will be an important element to help do that. And I really appreciate all of the research that has helped bring this community to this point of awareness. Thank you so much to Planning Director Becker for this presentation, and to the city.
And does that conclude public comment?
That concludes public comment.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We don't need a motion, but I think this was well worth the time from my perspective. It gives us an opportunity to think about this in the different jurisdictions in which we work. We have a study coming forward in the Santa Ynez Valley, a traffic and safety study. I'm very eager to see Vision Zero explored and perhaps adopted in that not city context, but highway context, as well as 246. So thank you. So please read item 7 into the record.
Item 7, draft regional growth forecast. Review and comment on the draft regional growth forecast.
Madam Chair and Directors, Brian Breslin from SBCAG staff. Some of this material may have heard in the sub-regional meetings last week, but I'll be brief. It's an overview of the regional growth forecast, a forecast of housing population and employment to the year 2050. It's going to replace the 2040 regional growth forecast. Major application of this forecast is for use in our regional transportation plan, which requires a 20-year planning horizon. It's also potentially used in our regional housing needs allocation as criteria for allocating housing need. And it's a consistent forecast for long-range regional planning. And this forecast has been adopted by the board a number of times in the past, going back to 1985. This is our consultant we hired to help us with the methodology and application of the forecast. This is what an economist looks like. He's from Palo Alto, not New Jersey, so he has been doing this a long time. He specializes in long-range forecasts, and he's worked with some of the major regional planning agencies, for example, Southern California Association of Governments. And he also consults with the Department of Finance Demographic Research Center and with the State Housing Community Development Department. The forecast method is basically a top-down, bottom-up. Top-down, we start with county-wide jobs, population, household forecasts. This forecast is basically driven by jobs. Then the bottom-up portion of the forecast allocates those county-wide totals to the local jurisdictions. These are the headline numbers for the population, households, and jobs. Essentially, increase in population by 15%, or 68,000. Jobs by 25%, or 58,000. And households 25%, or 38,000. This slide shows the population and jobs increase over 2017 to 50 period. Santa Maria gets the largest numerical increase in population. And that's because it has the strongest historical growth in population, so that trend has continued forward. And then Santa Barbara has the largest increase in jobs, as Santa Barbara has the largest proportion of jobs. So that proportion is carried forward as well. This shows the percent increase in jobs and population. The jobs basically all increase the same proportion because you're using 2017 proportions of jobs, and that proportion really hasn't changed over time. So we're carrying that forward. And so each jurisdiction gets the same increase in jobs. As far as population goes, Santa Maria, again, the largest percent increase, 32. Large increase in Buellton. There's large housing project underway right now. Also Guadalupe, another small city, which is a fairly large percentage increase with a large residential project. And then in South Coast, some of the smaller percent increases, Carpinteria, Santa Barbara, and Goleta.
And Director Adam has a question here.
Are you saying the jobs are going to stay flat?
No, I'm saying that the proportion of jobs, how they're allocated over time, is consistent.
Let's go back to that last.
That's the change for each jurisdiction. So each jurisdiction is going to increase by 26%.
Over the period.
That's correct.
All right.
Yeah. The distribution of jobs, the majority in South Coast, 60% versus 40% for the North County. Then we have the job distribution for the incorporated, unincorporated, and other. Just to point out, UCSB has 5% of the total county jobs, Vandenberg 3%, and the incorporated has the majority, 75%. And this shows the distribution for the cities in unincorporated area. Santa Barbara has the largest proportion of jobs. And so, like I'm saying, this proportion is not going to change over time. It'll still be 32% in Santa Barbara, but the number of jobs will be higher. Distribution of population isn't forecast to change dramatically. This is the 2050 proportion. Santa Maria picks up a few percentages, and Santa Barbara declines, as well as the unincorporated by a few percentages. But Santa Maria is the largest population in the county, 143,000, or 27%. This shows a household growth countywide. Households is a proxy for housing units minus vacant units. And we have the historical household growth. That's essentially supply. And then the 2020 to 2030 forecast demand of households or housing units for both our SBCAG forecast and then the Department of Finance. So our SBCAG forecast is lower than the Department of Finance, so our household demand forecast is less, but it is greater than some of the more recent historical 10-year periods. Again, this is demand, not supply, so we don't know where the supply is going to be in the future. That's up to the market. The state is trying to encourage more housing development with its policies. There's accessory dwelling units, so we may see a pickup in housing supply. If we don't see a pickup in housing supply versus demand, there's some things that may happen. This table shows the increase in population just based on more people living in existing housing units. Household size, it's called. So for example, for the city of Buellton, the population change over the 2010 to 18 period is 460. 20% of that population is living in existing housing units versus 80% in new households. The countywide average is about 29% of persons doubling up, or I wouldn't say crowding, but more people living in each housing unit. Carpentry has the largest percent of 38. This figure shows the countywide jobs versus employed residents. This basically shows where the county's net in commuting increased from 1990 to 2010, and then additionally from 2010 to 17. So it shows the number of jobs versus employed residents in the county. So there's an excess of jobs, and so we need to fill those jobs with commuters, and that's what's been happening. So our forecast assumes a commuting increase. Then commuters increased from 1990 to 2010 to 11,000. So we're assuming it'll double again by 2050 to 22,000, slower than historical rate, but and acknowledging an upper limit to net commuting. This shows the countywide birth, death, and net migration. This is from the Department of Finance and historical records. On the right side is the forecast, and the left side of the black line is the historical data. So the blue portion is the number of births, ranging in the past from 6,000. As you can see, it's slowly declining. Birth rates are declining over time. We're at about replacement rate, about 2.1 births per household. There's a debate whether that's going to continue to decrease, but it's looking like it is. So that may even decline further. And the orange portion is the deaths. The mortality rate's the same, but the population's older, so we're seeing more mortality. And at some point, it's going to come pretty close to meeting. So the natural increase, births over deaths, is going to decrease. Underneath the black line there, I have a 3,500. That's what it is in 2017. Net increase, births over deaths. And then 800 by 2060. So it's a pretty significant decline in births over deaths. And then we have the net migration, which is very volatile over time, but the Department of Finance has averaged it, and that's what it's looking like, a few hundred net migrants annually. And so our forecast is, we try to look at other forecasts and monitor the accuracy of theirs and ours, and Department of Finance has annual city population estimates we take a look at, released January 1st of every year. Or excuse me, March of every year, but it's the base is January 1st is their base estimates. And the Department of Finance also does a long-range forecast of 2060 of just population, so we try to coordinate with them and compare our forecasts. And also Caltrans does a population and employment forecast. That's done by the California Economic Forecast, Mark Schneep, under contract for Caltrans, and they do a long-range population employment forecast. And then we'll have the 2020 census results to compare with some of our assumptions as well. And then the local forecasts, UCSB, and again, the California Economic Forecast, to some local county forecasts that are very short range, about 2 years, for a variety of different indicators, but we definitely keep track of that. This figure shows the population comparison between the 2012 forecast that SBCAG adopted, and then the draft 2018, as well as the Department of Finance and Caltrans forecasts, the 2050. So the 2018 draft forecast is within range of these others. I just want to show that initially our population is a little bit higher. We have a pretty large job increase to 2025, but that levels off, and so by 2050 we're about 8,000 less than Caltrans and Department of Finance. This shows a job comparison. Again, fairly large job increase by 2025, but that stays fairly consistent, and where the change from 2025 to 2050 is pretty close to Caltrans. And we had to adjust this for wage and salary employment versus total employed, which is the difference is self-employed, so that Caltrans just does a wage and salary forecast. At the sub-regionals, you asked for more comparisons relative to the prior forecasts. So we're going to include this in our report, the final draft as well. So going back to some of the forecasts done in 1985, all the way up to the current draft, 2018, and then the actual is the red line. So this shows the jobs comparison, the prior forecast and the actual. So if anything, we're conservative relative to actual jobs forecasted. And that trend seems to be continuing. So I think it looks like we're in the range of actual jobs going forward. And this shows the population comparison. Optimistic population forecasts in the past. We didn't account for net migration in those past forecasts, so that's an important component now that we have to account for. So that has a tendency to reduce overall population growth because those commuters ordinarily would be living in Santa Barbara County are now living outside of the county and commuting in, so that reduces overall population growth. And that includes their households as well, not just the commuter. So it's, several persons, not just one person that is living outside the county. And then we also compare the households. Similar to population, we didn't account for net incommuting, so the households is going to be somewhat higher as well. And again, this is household demand, not supply. So we don't know what the supply is going to be. We're showing the demand and let market take its course. So we're over aggressive on the households as well. So we've been working with our advisory committee since January and had a number of meetings that reviewed all the material, recommended approaches and methodology. And now we're in October, so with sub-regionals and the board here just to receive the report and comments and questions. We'll have a public meeting November 5th. And then the JTAC, the advisory committee, will have plenty of time to review this material. They have already reviewed it for a month or so. And they'll have a final chance to review it and make comments as necessary. And then we are asking for board approval in January. So that concludes my presentation. I can respond to questions or comments.
We did hear this at our sub-regional committee meeting, so this is our second shot. And it's a lot to assimilate. I don't see any lights on up here. Director Julian, did you have any comments you'd like to make?
No, I'm good. Thanks for the update.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any public comment?
No public comment.
All right. Thank you very much. So turning to item number 8, would you read that into the record, Ms. Contreras?
Item 8, Local Streets and Roads Needs Assessment Report. Receive presentation on the 2018 Local Streets and Roads Needs Assessment Report.
Morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, directors. Nice to see you all today. Sarkis Kacek with SBCAG staff. Today we are very excited to actually have an item for you on the 2018 statewide Local Streets and Roads Needs Assessment Report. Every 2 years there is a joint effort by multiple agencies. You have the cities, the counties, and the regional agencies that come together to work with the local jurisdictions to identify what the needs are for local streets and roads, as well as bridges and other essential items. And then that report is released out to the public and for policymakers to review and see what the needs are over a 10-year period. So recently the 2018 report was released, so we wanted to present that to your board today. Before I introduce our local partners, I wanted to let you know that the California Transportation Commission did receive a report or presentation on the 2018 report at their meeting yesterday. So this is being dispersed to multiple partners and multiple groups. So with that, here today to present on the 2018 report as well as their local pavement needs and strategies. We have Mr. Scott McAlpin, Public Works Director for County of Santa Barbara, Mr. Chris Sneddon, Deputy Public Works Director for County of Santa Barbara, and Mr. Steve Kahn, the Public Works Director for City of Santa Maria. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Mr. McAlpin. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarkis, and good morning, Madam Chair and directors. My name is Scott McAlpin. I'm the Public Works Director for the County of Santa Barbara. It's nice to see everyone today. It's been a while since I've been to SBCAG, so we wanted to thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you this morning, talk about the Local Streets and Roads Report. As Sarkis mentioned, it's the 2018 edition, and I think it's the 6th edition of this very important report. And it'll be a tag team presentation. I'll give you kind of a general overview statewide, talk about the funding a bit. I'll turn it over to Chris Sneddon, and he'll talk a bit about the numbers statewide, looking at pavements, essential components, and bridges, then drill down and look at our county road system, and then Steve Kahn, the Public Works Director from the City of Santa Maria, will close on the state of their city roads. So the purpose of the 2018 California Statewide Local Streets and Roads Needs Assessment is really, when it started too in 2008, the mission really hasn't changed, but it was looking statewide at our transportation needs, looking at the limited available funding at the time across the state, and then it allowed us as appointed decision makers and you as elected decision makers to make the right priority decisions for that funding and for the resources that we had to take care of the infrastructure system. The one thing of note here is local roads in the state of California, city and county roads, are approximately 85% of the lane miles in our state. And this is interesting because nationally, city and county roads are about 78%. So we're kind of on the higher end in California, where cities and counties maintain the lion's share of the road system. Prior to the first edition of this document, in 2008, we really had no formal way, cities and counties, to let elected officials, both at the state level, local level, and federal level, know the condition of city and county roads. Caltrans did a really good job at documenting the needs of their system, but we didn't really have a way of doing that. So when the document first came out in 2008, it was really focused on pavements, and then it's kind of evolved over time, but it's allowed us now to go essentially to Sacramento, talk to our state delegations. It's allowed us to go to Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., talk to our federal delegations about the needs of our city and county road systems around the state of California. This is an interesting fact from the document. When you look at pavement, it's close to 330,000 lane miles of pavement in the state of California. And when we look at lane miles, it's 5,280 feet long, which is a mile, and it's approximately 12 feet wide, right? So if you were to go out today and drive all those lane miles, you would actually go around the earth 13 and a quarter times. So that's a significant road system, and that's what's being taken care of by city public works departments as well as county public works departments. As the document evolved, essential components and bridges started to become a big piece of the document. By far on the pavement side, we've come a really long way, and the data in there is tremendous. We have over 90% of the cities and counties reporting, and the essential components and bridge section just keeps getting better every 2 years when the new document comes out. And for my board members who are directors here, they know in Santa Barbara County, we've been reporting on our essential components, I think, since the 90s. And early on in our roadmap, it was pavement and bridges, and then we added drainage systems. Now we do hardscape and trees, and then we also do traffic devices as well. So we have a tremendous amount of really good data about what's going on with our road system. So my last slide is talk a little bit here about how we fund the transportation maintenance work in the state of California. And we look at it as a three-legged stool, and you know, some of my elected leaders may have heard me speak about that in the past. And as you know, if you're sitting on a three-legged stool, if one of the legs is short or one leg doesn't exist, what happens to the stool? It's pretty unstable, right? So I think throughout my career, most of the time transportation funding has been pretty unstable. But I'd say over the last decade, things are starting to change, and it's starting to get better, I think, in a big way, and a lot of it started here. Your leadership on the SBCAG board, back in the 80s, we got Measure D, and I think 10 years ago, we reauthorized Measure D, and it's now Measure A, and it went from a 20-year ballot measure to a 30-year ballot measure, and that half-cent sales tax has been tremendous for our transportation system in Santa Barbara County. And our voters understand the importance of the transportation network to them, to their lives, and to the safety of their families. Certainly at the local level, the different agencies get different amounts of general fund, perhaps. That helps with the transportation maintenance work that we do in our county. Our board approved an 18% allocation of unallocated revenue on an annual basis to deferred maintenance. It's kind of the first that I've heard of in the state of California. I think that happened about 4 years ago. So that money is now going into our transportation infrastructure system. So that's kind of our local leg at the county level. And certainly this is different for different agencies up and down the state. Over the last 2 years, the state of California approved SB1, which was essentially getting the buying power back in gas tax, since gas taxes hadn't been changed or modified since 1994, and that would be this leg. And then on the federal side, we've never really had a direct subvention from the federal government to help us with city and county road maintenance, and that's one thing we've been working hard at the county with NACO and the National Association of County Engineers. We've published a few resolutions, and we're trying to get a set aside through a future infrastructure spending bill that would help cities and counties as well. So our goal is to get all three of these legs equal length and try to stabilize maintenance funding for transportation needs, not only in California but across the nation. And then one last thing I'll touch on real quick is the report itself looked at 3 scenarios. The first scenario was our existing funding with the addition of the new revenue, the new gas taxes that have been coming in, and that adds about $1 billion a year to what we typically put on the street. It essentially will, over a 10-year period, keep the pavement condition index of the pavement the same. The condition still stays at risk, but the percent of poor or failed roads goes down by about 4%, and the good condition of roads goes up about 12%. So we can start making some headway with some of this new revenue coming in. If that new revenue were to go away, it would reduce our annual funding over that 10-year time frame by $1 billion. The PCI would drop to a 57, and Chris will talk later that statewide it's at a 65. We'd still be at a at-risk condition, but our poor and failed roads would start to go up, and our roads in good condition would go down. The report does look at a best management practices scenario, but that's to get roads to a PCI of 87, and with the goal of having no failed roads and 100% good condition roads. But you need somewhere in the neighborhood of $6.8 billion to achieve that. So that concludes my part of the presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris Sneddon now. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Good morning. So I'm going to start and give a real quick summary of the statewide needs assessment, looking at the current condition of those 3 components Scott talked about, and then we'll drill down to the county level, and then look at the needs part of the report as well. And then Steve can talk about some of the things that the city's doing to address those needs as well. So as Scott just mentioned, statewide we're at a 65, so it's been trending downward slightly over the years from the initial report you can see over here, and we're at the 65 level on a scale from 0 to 100. And what we're trying to do across the state is really, ideally, you're keeping your roads up in this good to excellent area. That's where it's the lowest cost to continue the maintenance. And over here, you can kind of see the cost differences between the various stages of road condition. It's shown as sort of like a stepping in cost, but really what it is a spectrum. So if you're at the top here and you're doing, fog seals or real light coats, you're looking at maybe $10,000 or $20,000 per lane mile, and then as you transition down here, you're getting into the $50,000 range. As you cross this line into the blue, you're now going from the maybe $50,000 to $100,000 treatment ranges per lane mile. And then below 50, it starts getting more expensive. You're talking about paving and heavier paving, and it goes, jumps from across this line really to about 150, and then down here you're at the $250,000 to $500,000 range. Really, sometimes you're doing full reconstruction where it gets really expensive. So, best management practices, Scott mentioned, I mean, ideally you're way up here in the green. We also talk about trying to aim for 70. If you can keep above this line, you're really keeping your treatments at a lower cost. So that's kind of the goal of where everybody wants to head where they can. Again, we're statewide, we're at about 65. So you're a 65 PCI road, you're starting to see some cracks. The structural section's still good, but you're gonna need to seal these cracks. You're gonna need to maybe do a few dig outs where there's areas starting to fail, and then you wanna get a surface treatment on there to seal everything up and keep all the elements out of it. And Steve will talk more about this, I think. So next slide. Essential components, as Scott mentioned, they're getting more refined at this every year with the report. One of the challenges is different agencies have a lot of different essential components that they're maintaining. We don't have anything related to snow maintenance or anything like that in our county, but we do have trees and sidewalks, which some agencies don't maintain. So it just varies across the state. So that's really just kind of a catch-all for all the different elements. It doesn't have a specific set aside, although it's eligible for work on SB1 funding work as it relates to roads. And then one thing to mention is the ADA requirements must be met prior to doing even thin surface treatments now. So we're seeing that you have kind of a higher cost to do what used to be a really low cost treatment, because we're going in and replacing all the curb ramps or hardscape that needs to be done prior to even the very thin surface treatments. The other thing to mention, and this kind of goes along with the Vision Zero discussion earlier today, is there's a lot of new things being proposed and new things being built for complete street reasons and safety reasons, and kind of up in the game with those flashing beacons and things like that. But all those things do add cost to the maintenance of roads as well. So when you in the past maybe used to go into this area and do these really low cost treatments to treat the surface, now your paint, if you're doing painted bike lanes and all this other paint and stuff, is adding to the cost of even the really routine maintenance. So it's just something to factor in when making decisions about things like complete streets and implementing new safety measures. For bridges, the main kind of takeaway on bridges is that the bridges across the state are aging. So if you look at the profile, and as Scott mentioned, there's about 12,000 local bridges. That's a lot. That's half of the bridges in the state that are locally controlled or owned. And of those, 2,000 are 80 plus years old. The typical design life, especially of older bridges, is more in the 50 to 75 year range. So as you can see, we're kind of outside of that, and the bridge program really needs about $600 million to $1.2 billion a year for local bridges, and we get about $300 million. So what we're going to see over time, and it's not indexed, so it's just $300 million for perpetuity unless something changes. So what we're going to see is this kind of profile is going to start shifting this direction over time. So that's something we're keeping an eye on, and as Scott mentioned, we're working on incorporating more information about that into these the statewide needs report for future funding decisions. So that's the kind of a summary of the condition on the statewide report. I'm going to talk about the county a little bit. So as you can see, the county and the cities are in that green or green to blue range. So it's and then maybe next slide. What it looks like just on that chart we just looked at before is if you add the county plus all the cities, we're at 61, and the unincorporated county is at a 56. So we're in that range of blue where we're kind of starting to drop towards the higher cost treatments within the blue zone, and that's why there's a big push to try and get it up here if we can. This is a summary of all the numbers. So And this is again the top chart here is from the statewide needs assessment, and the bottom chart is for the unincorporated county, to kind of give you a flavor of how it translates down. The pavement, county pavement, so that's county plus cities, is 3,200 lane miles. So I guess looking at it, how in a stretching distance, we're stretching pretty much across the country with our lane miles, and the annual need is 77 million. That's again to get to this best management practice of 87. Essential components is $333 million in the county and the cities, and we have 188 structures for bridges. 100 of those are county unincorporated bridges, and then the cities are the other 88. Looking at this chart at the bottom, I'm not going to go into it too much, but I think one of the things that comes up is, why do we talk about pavement so much? There's so many elements to the transportation system, but as you can see from this chart, which is the county backlog of maintenance needs, pavement is about half of that. So our total is about 315 million. 150 million of that is pavement. And the other thing is, and in the statewide, or looking at the higher level, it's even more of a percentage. And then the other thing is, pavement is in a constant state of degradation. So if you replace a bridge or you replace sidewalk, you're probably not going to have to touch it for 10 or maybe even 20 years to do anything. But pavement, you pave it, and a couple of years later, you have to keep doing maintenance on it to keep it where it's at. So that's why it's usually a big part of the discussion in needs and funding. So that concludes my part of the presentation, and then I'm going to turn it over to Steve to go down even into the city level to talk about Santa Maria.
Hello, again, I'm Steve Kahn with the City of Santa Maria, and thank you for hearing us today. It's very important that you understand the state of our asphalt throughout the County of Santa Barbara. We have just recently completed an in-depth evaluation of all the asphalt in the City of Santa Maria. We hired a consulting firm, and they walked every road in the city, so our numbers were fairly accurate and recent, and we'd like to share those with you today. First of all, I wanted to go over a little bit of Pavement Preservation 101. It's a little bit redundant with the stuff you heard earlier, but I think it's important that we all fully understand how asphalt wears and needs to be maintained. So asphalt deteriorates two ways. First of all, it just sits there, it deteriorates. The effect of sun and water removes the oils and degrades the asphalt, so it can wear out just by sitting there with no vehicle load on it. The other way it wears out is by vehicle loads, and this slide's pretty interesting. The number you see along the slides here are the number of just single-family vehicles. So a small truck, a two-axle vehicle, is actually like 442 small vehicles. So as you can see, as the numbers increase, these are the things that really affect the roadway from a fact of stress due to loading. So the bigger the truck, the heavier the truck, garbage trucks, moving vans, school buses, those are the vehicles that really affect the roadways. Single family vehicle really doesn't affect it that much from a loading standpoint. So this slide right here, this is the pavement condition. So up here the pavement condition is really good, and as it goes down here it begins to decrease, and this is time. So as I've expressed earlier on the earlier slides, as time goes on, pavement condition decreases. So when you get to this condition right here, you need to crack seal your road, seal up those cracks, keep the water out of the asphalt. So I like to say water is asphalt's enemy. Then as it gets down here a little further, you put in a slurry seal, you put in a chip seal, and then you finally get down to the more expensive measures and overlay and a reconstruct as the condition of the road fails. So what we try to do is we try to keep the road condition up in here by not having to come in and do a reconstruct, because it's much more expensive. And this just portrays that. So when the conditions are up here, you only need cents. Here you need a few more cents. When you get down in here for an overlay, you need dollars, and you need big dollars if you have to rip the road up and reconstruct it.
So if I might ask,
please,
if you just keep sealing, you never have to reconstruct?
No.
Okay, so there is a period.
At some point, you will have to re-overlay the road after you do a certain number of chip seals or a certain number of slurry seals.
Thank you.
That's a great question. What happens is the base eventually fails, so you have the dips on the road, the potholes, and then the base fails, and that's when you need to really go in there and redo it. So what we try to do is we try to apply the right treatment with the right pavement loading at the right time with the right materials. And if you combine all these together into your pavement program, that's how you really keep your asphalt in good shape. So what do we do in the city of Santa Maria to make this happen? First of all, we're very proud of our in-house staff. So our crews go out there, they go out and do the thin maintenance overlay, they do crack seals. This is Mahoney Road, by the way. They went in there, the road's in bad shape, so we're going in there just trying to keep it stable. It's not an overlay, but it's a good Band-Aid to help increase the length and life of the road. Here our staff is crack sealing, and here they're doing a little skin patch. And right here, this is yours truly. I try to go out with my staff, and I've gone out with the concrete crews, the asphalt crews, the lighting crews, the striping crews, to see how they do their work and see if I can't work with them. It's amazing the things they'll tell you when you're spending the day in the field and you're eating lunch, and you kind of hear about, you know, how you can make their job better. Huh? That's it. No, they know who I am.
Scott.
Yeah, Scott. And then we also, for the big jobs we hire, we go out to competitive bidding, and we have contractors actually come in and do the work. So this is a paving crew overlaying a road, and then here's a drone shot of a recent thin maintenance overlay in the city of Santa Maria. What else we've done is typically in Santa Maria we've done chip seals and slurry seals and then overlays. We're broadening that out a little bit and trying more and more methods to try to really get the most bang out of our dollar and make the roads the best. This is actually a thin maintenance overlay. It's a 1 inch and 1/4 thick, and it uses rubber from tires because it's more bendable, and it's also not as noisy. So we're trying all sorts of different methods in order to make the roads last and work for each individual uses. We've also moved away from chip seals in residential neighborhoods. We find that they tend to get on the cul-de-sacs, they tend to push away from the cul-de-sacs, and also they make a mess in people's front yards. So we're trying to be sensitive to the citizens' needs, and we're moving away into slurry seals in residential neighborhoods and away from chip seals. So what did the assessment say for Santa Maria? First of all, a few facts about our city. We have 228 centerline miles, and I'm just looking at the numbers earlier that Scott and Chris presented, and we are considerably less than the state, but we have a small amount. We have about 50 million square feet of pavement. The report shows, and I'll give a little more detail on this in a second, but the report shows that a PCI, or Pavement Condition Index, of 70 for the city of Santa Maria. Replacement value, if we replaced all the asphalt in the city right now today, it would cost about $1 billion. So we have quite an investment in our asphalt, and we want to preserve it and keep it. Currently, we're spending about $3.2 million on our asphalt program annually, and we plan to keep that up as long as the funding sources remain. So we're always trying to protect the funding sources and look for new funding sources to make sure that we have enough to keep our pavement condition index up.
Director Wolf has a question.
Yes.
Just real quick.
Sure.
So you used the term center lane miles.
Yes.
And our county staff used lane miles.
I noticed that.
Are they synonymous?
They are different terms. So a centerline mile means if you have a 4-lane road, you would have, that's just a lane mile, and 1 mile. Whereas lane miles, the lane miles would be every lane is a mile. So if you had a 4-lane road and you had 1 mile long, it would be 4 lane miles, right? Yeah. So they're different terms. One's center line, one measures each lane.
And does that definition determine or may change the PCI number? Or
no, it doesn't. Just about the volume of asphalt or the miles of road you have.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. So this chart is interesting. So here we have area in square feet, and here we have your PCI range. So this is a 91 to 100, that's very high, 0 to 10, very low, and everywhere in between. So and then the colors are, these are the residential streets right here. These are the collectors, little bigger roads, and these are the biggest roads in Santa Maria. These are the blue roads. So what you can see here is a large percentage of our square footage is at 60 71 to 90. So 71 to 90 PCI range right in here, very high. We do have some down in here that are failing. So what we're going to do is these rows right up in here, these are the ones we slurry seal, chip seal, and crack seal. These ones down here, we overlay them, and then these down here we have to reconstruct. So what we do with our program, we spread it out. We still know we have to do some overlays. We still know we have to do some reconstructions, and we still know we have to do the chip seals, overlays, and other surface treatments. So we do a little bit of each year, keeping these roads, preserving these roads, and then reconstructing these roads, which brings them back up when they're first done to right here at 100, and then they slowly go down as time goes on. So this is the billion-dollar number I was telling you about. The replacement cost of all streets in the city of Santa Maria, $984 million, or approximately $1 billion. We have $350,000 of arterials, $177 million of collectors, and about $500 million of residential streets. And here's the PCIs. Our arterials are our highest. We got those up at 75. And I like that because the arterials are the roads that most people drive. So you get more people on those roads. Plus also we get people, visitors to our communities. They come in and they'll go down our streets. And so we like them to be good for visitors and businesses that come in. Collectors, it's a little bit lower. And then our arterials are at 68, but still pretty good level. We definitely want to see them at this level or higher. Certainly we want to keep our roads at 70. We're always striving to go higher, but that's the current level of it is right now. So our future pavement strategy, what I described earlier, it's called critical point management. Pavement management. It's where you go in and you do some chip seals, but you also do overlays and reconstructs on roads that need them. So you blend your program to keep your system, bring it up. We're going to keep our pavement management system up. We have a computerized system where we load all the roads into the program, and it helps set up our program for the next year, which roads we should do, which roads need what type of service treatment, so it helps us and assists our program. So we're going to develop a 5-year management program to keep our PCI up at 70. We'll be presenting that to City Council and continue to work on that throughout the city. And I'd be happy to answer questions at this time.
Thank you. That was very informative. I don't see any lights on up here. And going, Director Julian, do you have any thoughts or questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
Good presentation.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. That brings us then to our 1-minute reports. And do any directors have any reports they'd like to make? I did want to bring up something. Our county is working on an ordinance having to do with the impacts of scooters and bikes. We see that particularly in Isla Vista. And there may be some advantage to having a regional discussion, or at least in our South Coast Regional Committee, because people travel from one jurisdiction to another and may have different rules, may be giving preference to different vendors. So I would like to have a more in-depth discussion at this, either at the regional meetings. Director Bennett.
Yeah, I would support that. I received our first complaint on the scooters this weekend, and I hadn't heard of any complaints before. And during our council meeting, because there's an app apparently you can tap into, we found there was an abandoned scooter in front of City Hall. So, you know, it's beginning to hit all of us, I guess, and it would be appropriate to have that kind of a conversation.
Good. Well, it may be more of an issue here in South County than North County, but I think it's going to hit all of us eventually. But maybe we could start with the South County discussion and then bring it back to the full board and see where to go if we get somewhere with it. Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes. Director Julian?
This is Julian. Yes, I need a brief moment, if I may, for an update. Mayor Lizaldi couldn't make it this morning. I spoke to him last night at about 7:30, and this would be his last meeting. He is no longer going to be on the City Council, and he wishes to thank the staff and also the directors for all the support that the City of Guadalupe has received in behalf of the city from you all. And also, just a couple of brief updates. We do have a new police chief in town, or police chief is a public safety officer, Michael Cash. And this coming Tuesday, we're doing a Guadalupe multimodal connectivity revitalization project. This coming Tuesday. We have, as Mayor Elizalde may have reported, we have a CDBG grant of $4.5 million to work on Leroy Park. Also the Pasadena homes, we talked a lot about homes today. There's, as you know, there's approximately 800 homes being built. They're moving on 100 homes per year, and we've got probably about 160 homes that are built to date. And with that footprint, there's going to be 17 acres, about 270,000 square foot of commercial space for us to expand. People Self-Help Housing is projected to build 38 units by 2020 in Guadalupe. We're working on our accessory dwelling units right now in terms of ordinances and moving forward with that. So we're looking forward to good things happening in Guadalupe. So thank you.
I gather you're running for mayor unopposed, so I guess this is your first of many meetings, and welcome.
Yes, this is dry run. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more lights for, Director Williams.
I'll just do one because seeing how we had the statewide needs assessment, there is just FYI, one potential game changer for Carpinteria, which is Measure X, is on the ballot and will be voted on, in 17 days. Measure X would increase the pavement index because the lion's share of the funding would go to streets. The other good thing that's non-SBCAG related is it would provide sustainable funding from the city for the library, which has been a big issue at the board.
For some of us, yes.
Yeah, for some of us.
And Director Wolf?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Kern, on the advanced calendar, there's nothing noted for December, and I know at our sub-regional we had talked about canceling the December meeting. So does that have to come back for formal?
We still have one more meeting before the December meeting, right. So I was going to announce it at the November meeting, but as it stands now, we don't have any scheduled items on purpose for December, so we are endeavoring to cancel that meeting. So that's the plan.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us then to our Executive Director's report.
Yes, Madam Chairperson, members of the board, in interest of time, I'll keep it really brief. I really want to thank our guest speakers today. They did an enormous job of preparing for this presentation, and their eagerness to participate and accept our invitations to give their presentations to you. I really, really appreciate it, and I think it was well received. And so we will continue to do this periodically to give you the opportunity to hear from our partner agencies and show what they're doing and share that information. So thank you very much to our local jurisdictions for stepping up. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to Caltrans. Ms. Persons?
Thank you. I'm Terry Persons with the Planning Division here for Caltrans today, and I will also keep it brief. I have 3 items I wanted to update the board on. The first is tomorrow we will be hosting a workshop at our district office in San Luis Obispo on the next cycle of transportation planning grants. And I also have some brochures here in case anyone wants some information on that. This includes the Strategic Partnership and Transit Grants, the Sustainable Communities Competitive Grants, and also the adaptation planning grants. And those applications originally were due November 2nd, but they pushed the deadline out to November 30th. So there is a little more time than originally we thought there would be to submit those applications. The second item I want to just do a very quick update on is on the bridges on 192. And yesterday, I believe there was a community meeting in Montecito, and Justin Borders, who's the project manager on those jobs, gave a presentation. So the most current information I have is from that presentation, and a number of very interesting photos of what's been accomplished so far. Just in terms of the dates when the different bridges are expected to be open for use, Toro Canyon Creek Bridge, it's looking like the end of November. For Romero Canyon Creek Bridge, it would be open also the end of November. And the Montecito Creek Bridge, end of January, and San Ysidro, end of November, Toro Creek Bridge, late December. And the Arroyo Paredon Bridge opening the end of January. It's my understanding that today the precast parts were supposed to be delivered, so we'll have to see if that's happened yet today. And the last thing I wanted to mention was regarding our public information officers. Many of you are familiar with Jim Shivers, who has spent a lot of time, obviously, recently in the area, and also Susanna Cruz, who is our public information officer in the northern part of the district. They recently received a national level award that was from the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, specifically for all the work they've recently done for public information and community outreach regarding a number of incidents, significant incidents that have occurred in our district, including the fires and the mudslides, also the Mud Creek, the large slide that happened in the northern part of the district. So they were recognized at a national level for all the work they've done, which was a pretty significant accomplishment for them. So just wanted to share that with the board. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be glad to address them.
Please congratulate them on our behalf, and they have our gratitude for the great work they did. I think, seeing no lights, that brings us to Calvans. Director Richardson.
I've been anxiously awaiting this presentation. Right, as much as the rest of you are waiting to hear it. At the last meeting, we approved a surplus list of vehicles for disposal at a public auction. There are 35 vehicles, age from about 2003 up to 2013. But the interesting thing about these 35 vehicles is the average mileage on them is around 300,000 miles before they auction them off. And thanks to CARB, California Air Resources Board, Calvans is getting another $1.6 million to purchase 160 GMC vans. There's a bid going out for those to replace those. They had a driver appreciation day. There's almost 1,000 vans in the system. Roughly 2/3 of them are for agriculture, the other third is for commuters. And they have a driver appreciation day for all the safety and those sorts of things. Let's see. Oh, the San Luis Obispo COG is going to authorize a voucher to pay for some of these drivers to use the vans, and also to provide vans in areas, cities that are, what's the word? I can't think of the word right now, that are not as well off, disadvantaged cities. They're putting these vans out in areas for people to use those as a service. And their maintenance for these vans, for the electronics on them, for GPS monitoring and tracking, was done by a company that was on contract. Became expensive because the vans had to be brought into a central area for maintenance. We've decided to hire a communications technician to travel to maintain all these vans. An interesting thing about it is that the wage range for this position is from $14 to $16 an hour. And I'm thinking, these guys are technical guys, with some training, as opposed to somebody that's working at McDonald's for the same salary. So I think we're getting a bargain if we can find somebody at that price, but it's an amazing thing to qualify them at that account. And with that, that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Director Richardson. It's been a great day at SBCAG. So with that, I adjourn to November 15th. We have our next meeting in Santa Maria at 10.